Hello everyone. In today's lecture we're going to talk about research article introductions. In particular, we're going to talk about the structures and functions of research article introductions. By the end of this lecture, you should have a clearer understanding of the three main structural elements that you need to include when writing your own research article introduction, and some of the functions that those research article introductions accomplish. Okay, so here's our plan. We're going to talk about the importance of introductions, then we're going to talk about a model for creating introductions yourself, and then three moves or structural elements that you can use to successfully construct your own introduction. It may seem like an easy task to write an introduction, or maybe it seems like a dauntingly difficult task, but experienced writers in academia find that introductions can be the most difficult section to write. I hope that we can talk today and in the next few videos about the things that you can include, and that this will help you have a clearer idea of what a well-structured introduction looks like. We're going to take a look at the important pieces that are included in introduction, as well as the overall role that introduction plays, and that I think will help give you a bit of context for what we're going to talk about in the next lectures. Okay, research article introductions are the first step, the primary or initial piece that readers see when they open your paper to look at it. It's the first thing that people read, and so it's the first thing that people, or the first thing that you can do to catch people's attention when you're writing. And you want to be able to catch their attention and maintain their attention so they read the entirety of what you've written. Hundreds, thousands, probably tens of thousands of articles are written every year and are published every year. But the time for people to read, as well as the space for publication, is limited. So you need to find a way to both get your idea accepted by journals and then get readers of those journals to actually read the entirety of your paper. And as Swales, we're going to talk about Hammond and Bennett, argues that abstracts, introductions have to compete with each other. We only have so much time to read, so most of us skim briefly, and so that we skim abstracts and introductions to try to decide if the article is worth reading entirely. Okay, so here's some advice given by O'Connor and Woodford about how to write an introduction, and I think most of us would agree that this advice is reasonable. They suggest making your introduction brief. You're not writing an entire review of in your introduction, but a short amount of information. You need to state the aim and the scope. You need to state your purpose and where it was done, depending on your discipline. You need to explain how your work moves things along, and you need to be concise but clear. This is great information, but how do you do these things? How can we write so that our paper can follow these rules? The authors tell us that we need to accomplish these things, but they don't really give us any clear ideas of how to do what they've said. This is where this class comes in. Okay, so next in the field after that was John Swales, and you can see him here. He's Professor Emeritus of Linguistics at University of Michigan. He wrote several very important papers and books that suggested that there is a pattern in what we do. So it's not just write concisely, but write concisely in certain ways. And he analyzed introductions in different fields and came up with a framework, a model for how people can write introductions. So he developed some structural elements he called moves, and some functions that he called steps. We're going to talk about those just now. So a move. Okay. A move, that's a terminology, and he defined it as the discoursal or rhetorical unit that performs a coherent communicative function in a written or spoken discourse. You may be saying, what does that mean? Okay, in other words, a move is a certain portion of a piece of writing that plays a specific role in a text. Okay? The important point is that a move is functional. It has some sort of function or purpose rather than grammatical or lexical. So it's not about the sentence structure and it's not about the words. It's about what it means. How does it function? What does it mean in the paper? And the other important piece is that we're not talking about how long it is. I'm not saying word or sentence or paragraph, but just move. It's some sort of functional unit. And it's not what part of speech. So we're not going to talk about nouns and verbs and things like that. Just functional unit. So the role that it plays is the important piece here. So to give an example, at the beginning of a novel, an author could describe the main character, the protagonist, and he might or she might describe that role by letting the reader know certain characteristics about the protagonist. And that would be the function of describing that character. But an author could also use some dialogue, and that could accomplish the same purpose. And then we'd also say that that dialogue was also displayed that function of describing the character. So different things that look really different, can have that same sort of function. And I hope that becomes more clear as we keep talking. Okay, a step is a unit of discourse that carries that functional meaning, which helps achieve the overall goal of move. You can think of move then as a larger category, and steps are individual bits within that larger category. So a step is one piece of a move. All right? And again, we're going to keep talking about this throughout most of the semester. So if these definitions are a little unclear, stay with me and we'll hopefully get more clear as we go. So Dr. Kotos and her team here at Iowa State created a model based on Professor Swale's Creative Research Base, or CARS model, that you can see here. So I've got an outline of the model that we're going to describe briefly in this lecture and then in the next several lectures. And you can see here we've got moves and steps in the introduction. The moves are there in yellow, listed 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a series of steps within each move. And notice that they have different numbers of steps, and that's okay. The steps themselves aren't numbered, and they can occur in lots of different orders. And while the moves are numbered, the moves can occur in different orders, and things don't necessarily have to happen in complete linearity. There's a lot of cycling around. So let's talk briefly about what these three main moves are. I'll show you a few examples, and then we'll kind of talk about where to go from there. So move 1 is called establishing the territory. And this is often the opening section that prepares the ground, so that lays out previous research, and that kind of defines the area that you're going to be working in. And the description of previous research is a really important part. It establishes the territory, the space that you're going to be using in your paper. So here's an example. I've underlined a few things here. So let me read the beginning of it to you. In recent years, the development of computer-assisted language learning, CALL, has created the need and opportunity for investigating the effects of multimedia on vocabulary acquisition. Let's just stop there. Note how the author introduces the topic, in recent years, and refers to previous studies. So in the next sentence we get, thus far, numerous studies, a long list of citations, have shown that computerized media and a multimedia environment can be helpful for learning foreign language vocabulary. Okay, so the author starts by gives us some kind of time and space. He says, we've been doing this recently. And then the author continues by pointing out the previous research that has been done. So we've got both bits of language, things like in recent years, need and opportunity for investigating, to convey both the recency. This is important. Lots of people are interested in this, and and the kind of value of what the author is doing. And then we see an important, like a list of all the citations and the use of reporting verb like show to, rely on previous research. Okay? Here's another example. In this example, which is from physics, we have, again, some linguistic cues, some cues from language, and I've underlined them for you. So in the very beginning, a number of authors have discussed the utility of a flat background metric, GMN, in general relativity. Okay? Other people have done this. It's generally important. Then, as we skim along, we also see I've underlined found that. Huggins found that. Okay, so another author has done some research, and this also shows up at the very last two lines. The last three lines. Einstein required that, and then Feynman showed these restrictions. Okay, so again, reporting on previous research. Other people have done these things. Okay, move 2 is identifying a niche. And this is an important step that involves important move that involves narrowing down of your research. So after the description of previous research, I've abbreviated that DPR here, or sometimes embedded within it, we need some sort of statement that forms a bridge between previous research and the research in your study. Okay? You review previous research, and then you need to say what you're doing, but there's got to be some connection between the two. And the most common way that authors handle this is by offering some sort of negative evaluation of that previous research. So there's some sort of limitation, gap, or problem in how the research has been done thus far, which necessitates what you're about to do. And let me show you a few examples of how we do that. So in this first example here, we've got, in these studies, however, the materials used for foreign language teaching were commercially available or teacher produced. No studies have investigated. Okay? So the authors are pointing out that there's a lack of knowledge in this area. And that suggests that what they're going to tell us next is that they're about to solve this problem. Okay. Again, here's another example from physics. We've got the same sort of limiting language. Although it has proved to be very fruitful in mathematics, it's rarely been tried in physics. Okay? So there's work and research shown in some field, but not in the field that I'm about to discuss in my paper here. There's a hole, a limitation. And we get other words like difficulty, elusive, wrong. And all of these help point to the fact that there's a problem and that the author is about to try to propose a solution to that problem. Okay, move 3 we've called addressing the niche. And this is the final part of the introduction that introduces the present research, what you actually did, either by giving the purpose or making some sort of descriptive statement of what you've done. And let me show you examples of that. Okay, so in our first example here, we have the present study reports data, and then we get examples of the sorts of research they've done, their investigation. This investigation sought to determine, okay, so a bit about the purpose of what they're about to do, and then a comparison was made, so more description about the analysis that the authors have done. So this is all information about what these authors actually did in their research. And in here, the example from physics, we have the same sort of thing. I apologize, the font is a little small, but I think you can read along with me. The authors describe the major characteristics and advantages of their physical axiomatics that are going to be presented in their paper. And so you can see that they just say what those axiomatics consist of. And then the next underlying piece, our approach has a number of important advantages. Okay, so there's some success. There's some really good reasons why their approach is useful. And then at the very end, in the last few lines, we see armed with this approach, in this paper we present their formulation and we analyze its structure. So again, we have kind of a foreshadowing, highlighting of everything else that's going to be included in their paper. Okay, before we finish up for today, I want to introduce what you're going to see when you do analyses yourself, and also kind of point out an important piece. So we've color-coded an introduction here, and you don't need to be able to read the words to be able to see the pattern here. You might notice it's blue, then red, then blue, there's a splash of green, and red, and blue, and red, and green at the end. And this is an important piece because although we've numbered the moves 1, 2, and 3, they don't always appear in that order, and in fact, they often occur kind of mixed together like this. So we've got blue being move 1, red is move 2, and green move 3, and you can see that in particular move 1 and 2, the blue and red go back and forth and back and forth, and this is a very common thing that we see across fields. So this is something to keep in mind as you go. Just because we're calling things 1, 2, and 3 doesn't mean they're always going to occur 1, 2, 3 in order like that. And in fact, you might expect that they don't occur in that order. Okay, so where do you go from here? There's a reading that you should do that will give you more kind of background of this information, another chance to review it. There's a brief quiz to help you check your understanding. And in the next few lectures, we're going to take a look at each of the moves in much more detail. And we're going to look at all the steps that are included in each of those moves. So if some of this was a little unclear, don't worry. We're going to talk about all of this in a lot more detail as we go from here. Have a good afternoon.